Hey, good morning, it's Owen, Bigland. This is the Inside Edge video blog. I was running an open house last weekend, so I want to tell you a story here. Had an open house last weekend. It was a townhouse in West Richmond here. Very nice townhouse. This is what I would call a superstar listing. I only get 2 or 3 of these a year. I wish I had more of them. A great older complex, what I call my Super 10 complexes. I've got about 10 older townhome complexes in Richmond that I regularly flyer and canvas. These are extremely well-run, well-maintained townhomes, good locations. They're not on busy streets. They're generally 30 to 40 years old. Many of the units, long-time original owners in a lot of these. There's very little turnover. This particular unit had been fully renovated to a very high standard. So I had listed the property. I knew I was going to get a lot of action on this home, so I do what we call holdbacks. I list the property, I expose it for 5 or 6 days, let all the other realtors look at it, and run one open house, and then I take offers the following Monday. Now, I had a guy that showed up at the open house, and this has happened lots of times over the years. This particular guy, I've met him a couple of times before. He's been in the market for at least 2 years now. He's shown up at many of my townhome listings that I've had over the last couple of years. He's got good taste. He only shows up at the real superstar listings, so that's good. He knows the market for sure. He's been doing his due diligence. When I get one of these good listings, he's been at several of them now. But you know, it's in talking with him, and I've gotten this story from so many people. He's not the only guy. You know, they're waiting for this big correction to come, and you know, it's always the same questions he's asked me. You know, what's going on with the market, and you know, when's this market going to correct? And you know, I have to tell him, well, gee, you know, we just had a market correction back in the fall of 2012. A lot of people don't realize that. A lot of people think this Vancouver real estate market has just been on a rocket ride for 20 years, and it's not. We had a fantastic buying opportunity in late 08, early 09, where prices dropped, depending on what the product was, anywhere from 6 to 15%. And we had another nice buying opportunity in 2012, where prices dropped anywhere from 8 to 12%. A lot of people forget that. But this particular guy, you know, he's been sitting on the sidelines. He's kind of waiting for that perfect opportunity that a lot of times, especially with these really high quality, what I call superstar listings, never really go on sale. They're in high demand, and you know, this townhouse ended up getting into multiple offers and sold well over asking, which I was expecting. But my advice to people is there's never going to be a perfect time, and I blogged about it before. If you've got a long-term horizon, and it should be buying your principal residence, you don't want to buy something if you think you're going to have to sell it in a year or two, because the market could be down 30%. But as long as you keep that 8 to 10 year window, you like the home, you're going to live in it and enjoy it, you are going to do fine. Don't worry about the short-term speculation or fluctuations. You know, it's much better to buy a quality home at a fair price than buy a fair home at a fantastic price. You've got to pay for quality, especially with this townhouse that he was looking at. But, you know, it pays to be in the game, and that's really what it's all about. Most financial advisors that will tell you this, that buy a good dividend stock or a good blue chip stock like Procter & Gamble, General Electric, Pepsi, Coca-Cola, Johnson & Johnson, Merck, Pfizer. Buy them, put them away, and just let time and compounding do all the heavy lifting and all the magic. Don't worry about what the short-term fluctuation of the stock does. This is your retirement money. You're going to keep it, you want to keep it in there for 20 or 30 years anyways. Leave it 20, 30 years ago, have a look at it, and it's going to blow you away what it's worth. Now, I wanted to tie this into an article that I've been wanting to do a blog about for a while. It had to do with an article in the Globe and Mail in the March 3rd issue of the Globe and Mail this past spring. And my summary to this is what do you expect the prices to do? That's what I'm asking these people who commented on this Globe and Mail. So the story was, it was a story they did in the business section about a guy, a 67-year-old guy, 67-year-old guy, who bought a Kitsilano home, a small little Kitsilano bungalow in 1983. He sold it for he bought it for $279,000 back in 1983. Boy, sounds cheap. $279,000. Well, I can tell you back in 1983, $279,000 was a lot of dough. I'm sure people were telling this guy back in 1983, you're crazy. Paying $300,000 for a 1,800 square foot house in Kits? You're out of your mind. That is never going to appreciate. I'll tell you my story. I bought a condo very close to that time, around 1986, one of my first investment units. I paid $47,000 for it on Ackroyd Road in Richmond. Now, I can tell you, $47,000 was a fair bit of dough back then. I can remember people telling me, are you crazy? I was a young guy. You could buy yourself a new Trans Am for that money and still have a ton of dough in the bank. That's what they told me. But here's the story in the Globe and Mail. Guy pays, in 1983, $279,000. He sold it this past spring. He got $1,875,000 for it. So it's a nice return. That's a lot of dough. Now, you should have seen the comments in the Globe and Mail on this. The negative comments that came on there, in an uproar. I mean, that is just crazy. Our prices are through the roof. There's no way a house should appreciate like that. We're in a bubble. The Chinese are driving these prices up. Close to $2 million. I mean, he's made 5 times what his initial purchase price was. Well, let's have a closer look at it. And as I said before, what did you think the prices were going to do? So if you go $279,000 to a final selling price of $1,875,000, go onto Yahoo Finance and go into a calculator that can calculate the annualized rate of return. You plug in the purchase price, the number of years, which is 32 years, and the final selling price. Well, when you plug those numbers in, the annualized rate of return on this guy's Kitsilano house was 5.5%. Hey, that's pretty good. Annualized 5.5% year after year after year. But hardly stratospheric by any means. As a matter of fact, if you asked a guy on the street, what do you think the average return on this house is? Most people don't understand compounding an annualized rate of return. They'd say, I don't know, it's up 10 or 12% every year. Well, it's up 5.5%. Let's also consider that he also had, that isn't straight into his pocket, he had some expenses to hold this property. He was paying property taxes. I'm sure he would have had a new furnace, maybe a new roof on there, probably renovated the bathroom and the kitchen a couple of times, landscaping. There's all kinds of expenses to hold that property. So I'm going to say that it drops that 5.5% annualized rate of return, let's say down to maybe 4, 4.25, 4.5. I think I'm being pretty generous there. So listen, that's a pretty good return. But inflation in Vancouver over the last 25 or 30 years has probably averaged 3%, 2.75. I mean, the averages have been dropped down here the last 5 years because we're running at very low inflation rate now. But average, over the last 32 years, it's probably around 3%. So this guy's Kitsilano house is a decent return, but it's only been maybe 1 or 1.5% above the inflation rate annualized over 32 years. So it's good. It's also provided this guy with shelter, a principal residence, and it's tax-free when he sells it, which is the best tax shelter we have in Canada. But here's the thing, what did people think the price was going to do? I mean, you'd think that you should at least keep pace with inflation, because everything goes up. The cost of replacing that house and putting a new roof and a new hot water tank and a new furnace, inflation makes that more expensive every year. So one final thing I'm going to show you here. Go back onto Yahoo Finance, and it's very easy to look up. Take a look at what other investments would do. So for instance, I plugged in $279,000, which was his purchase price back in 1983, if you would have bought the index, the S&P 500 index. So that's a basket of the 500 largest US companies. If you put that $279,000 in 1983, today it would be worth $4.1 million. I took another one, I just plugged in a bunch of numbers. One of the stocks I hold, Pepsi. If you would have put that $279,000 in Pepsi shares in 1983, today that's going to be worth $5,150,000. So substantially more than the house. Now, you can't live in your Pepsi shares. It's not going to provide you with shelter, and it's not going to be a tax-free capital gain either. But you don't hear people posting on the Globe and Mail about a Pepsi share that they bought 32 years ago, and today it's worth 10 times what they paid for it. But somehow with real estate, people get all up in arms when a guy makes 4.5% annualized rate of return. It's crazy if you ask me. So people need to realize, what did he expect the price to do? And that's why you've got to be in the game. Buy something, keep it, let time and compounding do its thing. It beats renting. It's the best tax shelter we have. Hope it makes sense for people and sheds a little bit of light on what the prices have done over the last 30 years in Vancouver. They've been good, but what did you expect them to do? They're about par to inflation and a little better. And if you can compare it to buying some good blue chip equities, I mean, it's not even close. I'm Owen Bigland. As always, this has gone a little long. Hope you learned something. I'll see you next time.